Welcome to the Orca. The voting is now underway in the referendum on the most important part of our democratic system here in BC, how we elect our provincial MLAs in the future. Both the NDP and the Green Party are campaigning in favour of instituting a proportional representation system, while the BC Liberals are standing up for the status quo, first past the post. Andrew Wilkinson is the BC Liberal leader. He's been making a strong case against proportional representation, and Mr. Wilkinson joins us now via Skype from Victoria. Hello and welcome.
Well, thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Why are you against this?
Well, there are layers of this, and we got to start with the concept that the voting system itself belongs to the citizens and voters of Canada and of British Columbia. It should not be open to political parties to play games with it and try to tweak it in their favor in a clear conflict of interest. And this was the basis for that Citizens' Assembly back in 2004, where the political parties were kept 100 miles away from it. It was up to the citizens, with all the right kind of academic support and the right funding, to take a full year to come up with a straightforward yes-no question. And we moved from there to the next layer, where John Horgan, during the election, said there would be a Citizens' Assembly, there would be a yes-no question. And in order to avoid Metro Vancouver swamping the rest of the province and, not really representing the whole province, there was supposed to be a regional threshold so that more than half of British Columbia's regions would have to buy in. All of that got tossed out the window. We then had what the media have called a completely bogus consultation, which was this online biased questionnaire, which David Eby is now relying upon to say that they consulted the public, which is clearly nonsense. And then they disappeared behind closed doors, and the NDP cabinet came out with 3 options, 2 of which have never been used anywhere in the world, and I haven't found anybody who can explain them. And we saw on the weekend that one of their cabinet ministers herself, Melanie Mark, just could not explain any of the 3. A CBC reporter asked her to explain from soup to nuts any one of the 3 systems, and she just fell apart and couldn't explain them. So if the authors of these options can't explain them, that tells the story, I think, that we should be very skeptical of going down this pathway that the NDP have created, when this really should be in the hands of citizens. It really should be something that people come to conclusions about without the meddling of politicians, including me.
Those campaigning for proportional representation say their mantra has been every vote counts. But after that, what next? How do you institute, as you say, these 3 very confusing systems?
Well, if we take it to the election day, Rick, and as you say, people go through and decide they're going to vote. First of all, the NDP won't tell us how many votes we'll have. They won't tell us how many MLAs we'll have. They don't tell us where the ridings are. They don't even tell us how many total MLAs there are. That's all going to be left to the NDP and the Greens to decide after we vote. So that's a problem. But let's say we do go ahead and vote under one of these new systems. And then proportional representation always leads to more small parties coming out. So all you have to do is get 5% of the vote throughout the province, and suddenly you've got 4 or 5 MLAs in the House, and you'll probably hold the balance of power. So this will be really attractive to fringe groups to get set up, and that's what former Premier Dosanjh has been pointing out, that this encourages fringe parties to appear. And to their credit, the NDP and the Liberals have to appeal to the entire public with a grand package that they will be held to account for. Under Prop Rep, after the election, the parties all go behind closed doors and cut a big coalition deal, which means you throw your promises overboard to get a grab on power. And there's this other thing that the NDP like to trot out, saying that with the current system, you get 40% of the votes, get 100% of the power. Well, that's nonsense. Under a Prop Rep system, coalition government, whoever can cobble together 51% of the votes is going to just ignore the other 49% of people. So there's a real problem there in that the idea of make every vote count comes to an end, a screeching halt, as soon as you put your paper in the ballot box. After that, the parties take over. They choose a good chunk of the MLAs because they're chosen off party lists. They choose which promises to follow through on, and they choose who to get in bed with and form a coalition.
Those people like yourself who are campaigning to maintain the status quo have been accused by the other side of fear-mongering as you bring up the fringe parties, and they say, well, that's the extreme example. But nonetheless, how do you combat that when you're talking to voters, talking to constituents across the province?
It's pretty easy, you know, when I go around particularly areas in rural British Columbia and say, let's get serious. There are going to be ethnic, regional, and religious parties. Some of them already exist. But if you could just get 5% of the vote for what I've called the Free Ferries Party, that would mean that probably people from Vancouver Island with 5% of the vote would come along and say, well, we'll join your coalition. But we did run on this platform of one item, which is free ferries. We want everybody else to pay for it. That's the kind of that is quite plausible in our province because it's a big, diverse place. You know, in the Northeast, in the Peace Country, it's all about the petroleum industry. On southern Vancouver Island, a lot of retirement issues. Metro Vancouver, there are a lot of issues related to newly arrived Canadians. I'm an immigrant myself, and there are a lot of people who have issues like language and training opportunities that are specific to their communities. So it's entirely likely that we will have a proliferation of parties and that some of them will hold the balance of power.
What are the polls telling you right now?
Well, what we understand is that, and polls are pretty spotty these days, as you know, because of the return rates. What we understand is that the more people learn about this, the less they like it. And so the concern is, will people actually fill out the ballot before coming to their own conclusions of whether they understand it? Because Canadians are very dutiful people. We get something in the mail that looks like a form we're supposed to fill out. And we say, well, gee, it would be nice to have a change. And then I have to fill out this 9-box bingo sheet. And what the polls are telling us is that once people have that information in hand, their enthusiasm for Prop Rep drops significantly.
I know there's still a large portion of the population that is undecided. How do you reach out to that portion of British Columbia?
Well, I'm not going to whine, but it's difficult. We have very tight spending limits put on us as a political party.
Right.
If you want to spend money on this, the NDP have created a whole swath of rules. So the maximum you can spend to reach 5 million people is $200,000. And they're actively pursuing and prosecuting people who spend $20 to boost a Facebook posting. This is a problem because this being a citizen's right about voters' rights, there should be a free-flowing conversation about this. There's also the problem that the NDP intentionally timed this thing to happen right after the municipal elections, so that people's interest in political brain space was used up until late October in the municipal elections, and now the ballots are in their box. And you know what? The feedback we're getting is that people are quite confused by the ballots. They're not sure what to do with them.
Does the mail-in ballot concern you at all?
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, it's a no-brainer. This should have been done at the time of a general election, because they would completely wipe out the prospect of fraud, because every human has to show up with ID and be verified by another human. That's how our elections have been conducted for years and years and years. And the other problem is just levels of awareness. If it's held at the same time as a general election, like we did as BC Liberals in 2005 and 2009, and you got to remember, that was something that the Liberals did at the time that was not particularly in their interest. They thought it was a duty of the public, and the political parties were kept completely out of that process. This time we have the political parties are unfortunately ended up to their armpits. The NDP are setting all of the agenda. The NDP set the options. And just think about that for a second, Rick. Why did the NDP cabinet members get to choose the 3 options? Why is that? There are lots of different options around. Why weren't other things described? And in particular, why did they choose 2 things that have been never used anywhere in the world? And those are 2 of our 3 options. So who should be deciding here? Citizens should be deciding, not the NDP.
Mr. Wilkinson, a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for your time, Rick. Good to see you again.